Hi everybody, this is the quiz number 3 review sheet. And notice here the format, like our other quizzes, will have some multiple choice and matching and then some term ID, where you give me the meaning and explain its significance, and a couple of other written response that I'll explain as we go here. Alright, so with our first section, we're looking at the Tankman video and knowing some of the items and terms from the particular video. So for example, we have China A versus China B. Remember, China A is the TW side of China, where we've got big business, big investment, facing TW problems like urbanization and too much pollution. We have a huge growing middle class in China A. This is where big governments go to invest. This is the wealthy, industrialized, the also growing, expanding economy side of China, the China A, versus China B, which is the vast majority of the country, or the DW side. People are poor. They're not benefiting from the post-Tiananmen Square deal, and they face a lot of issues of other DW countries, like lack of infrastructure and lack of basic clean water, for example. And then when we look at the main differences between the US and China, there's lots of things you can put here, but some of the examples include no free press, no free religion, no free speech, no censorship, no laissez-faire. One of the big things here we want to think about is no censorship of the internet. Okay, so you also could point that out, that we're going to have a free internet. That's not censored, as opposed to the China side. Lots of limits, very strict censorship, government interferes, use of military against their own people to break up protests. All those types of things are our main differences. In addition, go back and review your notes on why you feel Tankman blocked the path, and think about how has Chinese society changed over the last 30 years. There's a lot of changes. We'll review all that next. In terms of how has the Chinese society changed over the last 30 years, we've seen massive gross domestic product growth, way more than what we've seen in the US. We've seen blank fields, paddy fields become amazing skylines in the world's workshop. We've seen an increase in consumerism and in spending and in all those things that impact the Chinese economy. All right, so in looking at the 2.2 article on living in a global economy, here's some benefits and here's some negatives. And you can have lots of different things for your notes, but just a few little things out of the article. We've seen fortunes soar in countries as foreign investment has poured in. That's a positive. We've looked at specialization, that countries can do what they do best, like the whole Guatemala bananas example versus the American wheat and corn. We've seen $400 billion worth of new factories in developing countries, lifting hundreds of millions out of poverty. The U.S. is a leading exporter, and we've increased our trade. It's been a very important part of our economy. That has included job growth in the United States. So those are all positives. Some negatives, we can see that we're seeing that people are losing their jobs. This argument right here, it would be more of a positive, okay? So buying inexpensive things or leaving subsistence fishing would be a positive. But then the negative here would be we see that workers are outsourced. So Mattel finds that it can produce its products cheaper elsewhere. We also see Nike sweatshops as a concern in Indonesia. So lots of negatives to consider as well. Additional negatives are going to include things like the shutting down of industries as a result of globalization. So we see that the Scottish shipping and building industry shut down, and we've seen downward wages and living standards for people in developing countries. In addition, we've seen the increase of sweatshops around the world, which is a negative of globalization. On the quiz, you're going to be given a 2-column chart like this, and you're going to need to fill in 2 positives and 2 negatives of globalization. We also see here then the terms of trade, and I specifically mentioned to you that you would need to know these definitions from this list. I mentioned that you would need to know these terms from this list right here. So we see globalization, the trend towards single worldwide market without respect to national borders, imports, goods or services brought in from a foreign country, exports, goods or services sold to a foreign country, protectionism, policies aimed at shielding domestic industries from foreign competition. That simply means that when a country raises a tariff, which is our last term, to discourage foreign imports, put a tax on foreign imports, a tax on imports, that's like a protectionist policy. We also call that fair trade policy. Another term you'll need to be responsible for is sweatshop, and we'll talk about that in our next slide. All right, so here is our next article. This was the Deconcilio, Who is Making My Sneakers No Sweat article. And we know sweatshops to be those types of factory conditions in developing world countries that are unsafe, that are dangerous, that are excessive hours, very low wages. And we see that a lot of the negatives from globalization are going to revolve around sweatshops. So that's something to point out here. We see in different countries very low rates of pay. We've seen an encouraging of companies to go overseas and outsource. Remember our activity on Race to the Bottom, the transnational capital auction. Those are all examples there. We see 200 million children working in sweatshops today. That article was in 1997, so it would be important also to do more research on that. We'd like to hope that that number is lower today after 20 years of knowledge about the subject. Many countries don't comply with laws. We see that as well. See mistreatment of workers, a major negative. All right, global economies have made it impossible to see what working conditions products are made in, so it's very challenging. Okay, some of the positives of this article, it's going to be more along the lines of awareness and working on solving the solution of sweatshops. Groups have formed to stop mistreatment of workers. We've seen criticisms of lots of companies, Disney, Walmart, Nike was mentioned in the article as well, along with many other companies who have been criticized. So we don't just highlight 1 or 2 companies, but there are many. The article highlights 1 or 2 companies, but there are many out there. We do see one of the arguments of the positive is that we see that companies are investing in some sort of care and infrastructure. Also a positive, 84% of Americans surveyed would pay $1 more to ensure that their clothing and products weren't made in sweatshops. And you can also inquire, although it takes more work, you can inquire, and there are organizations that help give information about where products are made. So consumer awareness, consumer power can be a positive outcome. People responding and also companies responding. Remember that the Nike spokesperson was quoted as saying that we're bringing infrastructure and investment to places that never had it before. So there's arguments there for positives. All right, next we have then 2.4, and this was our follow-up to the lesson we completed in class. And so I'll highlight some of these terms and ideas for you right now. All right, so remember technology revolutionizes the world's economy was our first subheading in chapter 36.2. We see global economic development beginning at the end of World War II, right around 1945. We see lots of new industries as a result of scientific advances, and plastic is significant because now Plastic is more plentiful. It's cheaper. Remember, like steel during the Industrial Revolution becomes refined and more plentiful and cheaper. Now we see plastic creating all sorts of new products, thousands of new products, which are now imported, exported, bought and sold, expanding consumerism and the amount of products available. So plastic is going to have a huge impact on just the growth of producing new products, cheaper products that are more affordable, so people buying more things, more manufacturing. It's all a cyclical effect. One thing leads to the next, all growing the global economy. All right, so then we're looking at multinational corporation and global economy, two major players of globalization. All right, so how global economy is different is it's not just the buying and selling of goods across borders with free trade, but it's every financial transaction. So people, businesses, and governments all working in the global economy. This could be investing in foreign governments, investing in foreign companies. We don't invest in foreign governments, but we do invest in foreign-owned companies. It could be banking and saving and investing across. It could be governments helping out other countries invest in their infrastructure. It could be businesses helping out other countries invest in their infrastructure to help attract new jobs over time. So everything has become more globalized as a result. The global economy is that general term for everything, not just the buying and selling of products, which is more along the lines of just globalization. And what's making all this possible is the growth in the multinational, transnational corporations. It's the same difference here. These are companies that operate in a number of different countries. They might have manufacturing plants in one country, a main office in another country, and stores in many other countries. And we see that a lot in the United States. Just here in our local area, we have Intel. They're a major producer, but they're also they have businesses around the world. Nike's another good example, corporate headquarters here, but they've got operations all over the world as well. Okay, so then we've got the movement toward free trade, of course, is what's greatly expanded the global economy. And the movement toward free trade includes all of these world trade blocs. All right, so groups of countries that have come together to support free trade. The examples in our notes include the European Union. Europe has basically come together economically, and they've broken down barriers of free trade and import bans and those types of things. We are seeing a little bit of a movement of change with the United Kingdom or Great Britain leaving or exiting the European Union recently, but this is done more to promote globalization. And then in our own neck of the woods, NAFTA, a free trade agreement between the United States, Canada, and Mexico, has also greatly contributed to free trade and the expansion of globalization in our lifetimes. Okay, and last but not least, some terms from our globalization free trade vocab lesson. And these terms we have spent some time on here in class, so let's take a look at the 2.5 definitions here. All right, so last but not least, we've got these four terms. So fair trade is the opposite of free trade. This is where we say governments are going to step in, they're going to regulate trade more. Government's better off if they're involved, that we're better off if government is involved to reduce outsourcing and improve worker standard of living. They don't think that all globalization should be stopped, but they think that government needs to regulate it more to eliminate the negative results of free trade, such as sweatshops, for example. Free trade is the viewpoint that we should have a free flow of goods that government should not regulate. People with this viewpoint believe that we'll be better off with less government. There does need to be regulation of free trade, but it's the consumer's job and not the government's job to regulate free trade. Kind of like the idea of freedom and power of consumers, that they vote with their dollars, and when they don't like a company, they won't spend money with them. Then we have outsourcing, which is when a company based in one nation, like usually a TW, moves to another country. Okay, so closing plants in the US and moving those plants to Indonesia and China, for example, and that's happened across multiple different businesses. Now we also see a move where politically people, both Democrats and Republicans, in a lot of cases are arguing that we should bring jobs back to the United States. It's just kind of a difference of how it should be done, but that's a political debate right now in this country as well that we're seeing. And last but not least, the race to the bottom. This is the idea that developing world countries are competing with each other for investment from multinational corporations. And so we see that in the race to the bottom, we see a lowering of wages and environmental regulations. You guys did the transnational capital auction. That was a representation of this idea of race to the bottom, right? It's considered a negative of globalization, right? Because it's further downgrading the quality of life for people in the DW as they make products for the TW. All right, so when all is said and done, I hope that you study and prepare, and I hope this review helps you. 20 multiple choice matching. You're going to have to do two term IDs. I'm going to give you a choice of a few options, and you're going to choose two of the options that I give you. Not only the term, but also the importance. And remember, if you have a hard time with importance, you can look at the essential questions on the board that are always there for you in the classroom. So you can take one of the terms, and after you define it, you can think about how does the term relate to one of these questions here, and that's a way to give impact or significance. Usually it's a tie to the modern day, how it affects our life today, historic roots, effect on the world today. So it's impact beyond just here's the meaning, but also then how does it affect people. So that part will be done in writing, and then the last part will be positives and negatives of globalization and comparing and contrasting China and the United States. Okay, so that's going to be your other written response questions, so just be prepared for those as well. And I hope that you study and prepare and have yourselves a good day, and good luck on the globalization and Tank Man quiz coming up soon. Goodbye.